I'll now introduce our next speaker for the day, Dr. Linda van Bommel. Linda is Australia's leading livestock guardian animal expert, and she has been doing field research on livestock guardian dogs for over 17 years. She's also the author of the Best Practice Management Manual for the Use of Livestock Guardian Dogs. Please make her feel welcome. Is it working? Do you want to give it a go?
Yes, I'm sure this is
It's all happening.
And also meet Sky.
I'm so sorry.
That's all right. Sky is a Maremma sheepdog, and she specifically comes to things like this, so people get to meet a Maremma and they get to know what one looks like. And they also get to see that, I know that a lot of Maremmas have quite a bad name out there of being really aggressive. They're not. They don't So please also feel free afterwards or whenever to come up and say hi to her, because she loves getting pets.
You couldn't get a better demonstration. Compared to what I've seen, I can back you up on your first
Anyway, maybe I'll just hand it to
Yeah,
because I would still like to give you some more information about livestock guardian dogs. First, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land of which we meet today, and also of all the land that I've done my research. There's actually 40 different breeds of livestock guardian dogs that are actively being used to guard livestock. Here in Australia, we only have a handful of them, and most of them are quite rare breeds. They used to be very It's historical reasons that we ended up with mostly Maremmas here in this country. So what is a livestock guardian dog? That sometimes confuses people a bit too, because most people, when you talk about livestock and dogs, they're used to herding dogs, like kelpies and border collies. And most farmers especially will think kelpie border collie when we say livestock dog. However, there is a very, very big difference between them. Like kelpies and border collies, they are bred to resemble predators. Both in the way they look, like with the prickly ears and the really pointy nose, in their behavior, like with their eye and stalk and chase, that's how they move livestock. The stock's afraid of them and moves away. I would not trust a herding dog with livestock unsupervised for a long period of time, because generally it doesn't end so well for stock. The guardian dogs, on the other hand, they have been bred to be as non-threatening to livestock as they can possibly be. They've got the big round heads, they've got the floppy ears, and if you see them move with the livestock, they're very submissive, and they keep their head down, and they only glance sideways at the livestock. And they're just trying to tell the stock that no, I'm not here to loot you, I'm here to just be friends. Guardian dogs, on the other hand, will not herd your livestock on command. They simply will not do it. They can't. They're just there to live with your livestock peacefully and protect them from threats. Now, of course, the next question is, are they effective here in Australia? Well, the short answer is yes, they are. They can be very effective. It's one of the things that I set out to find out when I started my research many, many years ago. And I spoke to 150 producers that were using livestock guardian dogs, and asked them all sorts of questions about their dogs. I did the research in 200 properties in all the states in Australia, all livestock types, all property sizes from 7 to over 300,000 acres, and all predator types. And of interest probably to the people here is that 52% of these producers said that dingoes were their main threats on the livestock. And I asked them about their stock losses before they got the Maremmas and after the Maremmas started working. And it was actually really positive. About 96% said that predation had significantly decreased after their dogs started working, And about 66% said predation had ceased altogether. Nothing was lost to livestock anymore at all. But even a significant decrease in predation can still make a huge difference. Like, I mean, you've got the situation where 120 lambs just get eaten by dingoes, and suddenly you have a survival rate of 80% of those lambs. It can mean the difference between going out of business and actually being able to continue running your sheep. Not only that, they're quite cost effective as well. Because lots of people tell me, now dogs are too expensive to run, I can't afford it. If you look at the x-axis here, that represents the number of years that somebody had a livestock guardian dog. So at year 0, somebody starts with a puppy. The y-axis represents whether that dog is a cost or a benefit to that particular producer. So in year 0, a little puppy is not going to protect any livestock. So the owner is only going to have a cost of that dog. You have to feed them, you have to look after them, you have to buy them to start with. And this is cumulative over the year, okay? Over the years. So as that dog matures and starts growing up and starts protecting livestock, then the value of the stock it saves starts to offset the cost that you have to maintain it. But not only that, for all major livestock categories, within 3 years, that dog's not only paying for its own upkeep, but has also reimbursed the owner for the initial expenses they had for it. Now, obviously, these are averages from my research, and the line will depend on the value of the livestock that's being run and how much money somebody's spending on the dog. But overall, it still looks pretty good for the cost effectiveness. Now, another thing people were asking me is, do they remain effective in the long run? Don't predators just learn to work around the dogs if they're there long enough? So I thought that was a great question, and about 10 years after the initial research, I spoke to all the producers again that I spoke to initially. I found that half of them were still using their guiding dogs. And of course, the ones that were not using dogs anymore, I asked them, why not? Why did you get rid of the dogs? There was a whole range of reasons, but the interesting thing about this is that more than half of them said they just didn't have a need for them anymore. They're retired, they changed their business, nothing to do with the dogs whatsoever, they just didn't need them anymore. Other than that, there were a couple of reasons. People had problems with their dogs, sometimes with their neighbors, which caused them to get rid of their dogs or something else. But still, most of them stopped using guided dogs because they didn't need them anymore. Nothing to do with the dogs themselves. Of course, that still left half the producers that were still using dogs, and they looked at the effectiveness of their dogs 10 years down the track. I compared the losses between the first interview and the second interview, and this is what the people told me themselves, what they were using. And I found that 95% of the cases, the dogs were equally effective 10 years later. And there were only 3 cases where the dogs had become less effective. But on those particular properties, the owners had also really increased the number of livestock they were using, but not the number of dogs they were using. So those dogs were probably spread over the team. And when I asked the owners to report the effectiveness of the dogs themselves, I got very, very similar results. So I kind of all matched up. Dogs don't become less effective with time. 10 years later, they were equally well as they did when you first started them. So that makes me a very firm believer that as long as a sufficient number of guardian dogs are used and they are properly managed, they are an effective and cost-effective parental control method here in Australia. And the size of the property doesn't matter. They can work equally well on a 7-acre property as they can on a 300,000-acre property, as long as you have enough dogs to do the job and as long as they're properly managed. Those are 2 very key points. You miss out on those, things might not work out so well. So, how do they actually do it? How do they do it? How do they keep the livestock safe? Well, traditionally, when those were still working with shepherds, and back in Europe, like that often still happens, they're pretty much an early warning system. Something happens, the dog starts barking, and the dog and the shepherd become a team and deal with whatever comes Now here in Australia, we don't use shepherds, so that's probably not all that important anymore. But they are a very big deterrent. The dogs are very territorial. Anything that comes into their territory gets dealt with. They'll know about it, they'll go out there, they'll bark at it, they'll chase it, they'll deal with it, they'll see it off. And as anybody with Miranda or another guardian dog will tell you, they bark, and they bark, and they bark. They're very, very noisy. And that's part of how they work, right? Because they just broadcast far and wide that this little patch of ground is occupied and anybody who wants to come here and enter here better beware because there's a big white dog that's going to meet you there. And if you think about it too, a Miranda on average will weigh about 35 kilos. A dingo, maybe 15, a lot of them are a lot smaller. And those dingoes aren't stupid either. They know that those guardian dogs by far outweigh them. And if they risk a confrontation, then well, they risk injury or maybe death. They're not going to go there, they don't want to do it. They know that there's a couple of dogs guarding that patch of land. Chances are they'll just avoid the place altogether because there's too much risk. There's no way they can easily pinch a sheep and take off with it because there's going to be dogs that are going to make it in there. If necessary, guardian dogs will use direct confrontation to deal with dingoes. But in all the 17 plus years that I've done research, I only know of 2 cases that has been confirmed to happen, where there has been a fight between dingoes and guardian dogs. And in both those cases, in my opinion, there weren't enough guardian dogs. It was 2 guardian dogs against 10 dingoes. So the dingoes probably felt strong because they were in a pack, there weren't that many guardian dogs. Well, it all comes down to it, it's sufficient number of dogs for the property situation. So I don't think that happens very often, to be honest. Another thing is that the guardian dogs can actually provide a lot more benefit to farmers than just predator control. From the research that I've done, I found they actually have a very strong effect on the herbivores in the area that they're working at as well. I've mostly looked at the kangaroos, wallabies and deer. And the paddocks that have guardian dogs most definitely have way fewer large herbivores than the paddocks that don't have guardian dogs. It's one of the projects I'm actually working on at the moment, one of the things I'm specifically looking at, where I'm placing guardian dogs in an area specifically to keep kangaroos under control. So I can update you guys in a couple of years when I have the results. I'll have some real data. And another additional benefit of these guardian dogs is the effect that they have on the livestock itself. And that's something a lot of people don't realize and isn't really recognized. But if livestock is under constant threat of predation, they get very stressed. If you get a lot of stress in livestock, it actually affects their productivity. You'll get breaks in the wool, which reduces their value. They won't put on as much weight. The females, there might be a lower percentage that's actually fertile and will get offspring. And many farmers have told me that when they put dogs with their stock just becomes calm and quiet and happy and relaxed. And there's no evidence for this. And it's one of the things I hope to look at some point in time. But you can imagine if that stock becomes a lot less stressed and you take all that stress out of them, their productivity will increase, which can then actually be an added benefit for the farmer who's using it. And I'm assuming that goes for all guardian animals. The donkeys will probably have a similar effect. Again, funding research at some point. I'll look at it. Now, of course, you'd think, look, you've got this ideal picture of this beautiful dog, well behaved, doing exactly what it's supposed to do, guiding its livestock, taking it right there. It takes a while to get here. That is the big warning message with guardian dogs. Because most people, when you get into a guardian dog, that is not what you start out with. That is what you start out with. And there is a bit of a road to go from that to that beautiful idealistic picture. And you think, right, a puppy. And the puppy needs to learn what it's supposed to do. So I'm going to do all this training with this dog. And I'd say, no, you don't. You do not train a guardian dog. You bond with them. Bonding is much, much more important for guardian dogs than trading will ever be. And trading kind of implies that you take this really active part and you sit there and you actively do stuff with the dog. But when a guardian dog you don't, what you do is you provide the correct environment for the puppy to grow up, that it learns what its job is, that it develops that attachment to its livestock. And that attachment to the livestock is what will make it protect that stock once it's an adult. Now, very, very simply put in a nutshell, is you have a little puppy, you put it in a small area with a small number of gentle livestock, and it lives with the livestock. You don't bring it inside, it lives with the livestock. And as the pup matures, you slowly increase the size you keep it in and the number of stock with. Simple enough, right? However, and that's where the doodles come in. There is this thing called the juvenile phase. And during the juvenile phase, not many people will tell you this, but this cute little puppy will turn into an absolute velociraptor. They will start playing with the livestock, they will start harassing the livestock, they'll pull wool in sheep, they'll chew on the ears, they'll chase them. And this is an absolutely normal developmental phase for them to go through. Most people give up on them at that point, and a lot of founders will go and shoot their dog because they say it's harassing my livestock and can't do anything with it. That, however, is not true. It's a very normal phase for them to go through. But you need to supervise them. At that point in time, it's critical for those puppies to learn how to behave around the livestock, and that rough play is just simply not allowed. Usually happens between 6 months to 2 years. How long that phase lasts depends on the individual dog. How bad they get depends on the individual dog, but it's certainly something that requires supervision. Another thing to be really aware of with guardian dogs is containment, because these dogs have a tendency to roam. If you're on a small property, good fencing is very important. Because for most dogs, the area that they would naturally use is much bigger than the size of a small property. In my research, those that were naturally allowed to just establish their own homeland used up to 1,000 acres. Most properties are smaller than that, so fencing becomes quite important. If you're on a bigger property, it's just not practical to keep up with having perfect fencing everywhere. It's just not practical. Fence training becomes very, very important. And it's very doable. We can teach right from the start that a pup can never go through the fence. If you can agree with fencing when they're small, they get that mindset that they cannot go through fences. In addition, another thing that's very important is to create a very, very strong bond between the dog and the livestock. Because if that dog is glued to that livestock, wherever the livestock goes, the dog will fall out. And you already prevent a lot of issues with the dog on the ground. Now, another couple of general management things which are very important is always de-sex your livestock animal. There's a lot of research out there of people who are interested in this topic which shows that de-sexed guardian dogs work equally well as intact ones. There's no difference. Some say they actually work even better because they're not distracted by the urges to breed and only for a mate. And especially if you're in an area with dingoes, even though hybridization might be unlikely, you simply cannot take the person moving around. Imagine if they do hybridize, you see, well, you've got running around looming and having them. You need to think about feeding them. Lots of people use self-feeders, which you can just refill every now and again, and you provide food them every day. You have to think about healthcare. And another thing is, you always have to be able to handle the livestock animal. You can't just let them be half feral dogs in your paddock, because if the dog gets injured, you have to be able to catch it and take it to a vet. Mustering is something you need to think of, because that's something they need to get used to from the time they're a little pup. Because you can imagine if you've got an adult dog working in the paddock guarding your sheep, and suddenly all these people rock up and start taking the sheep away, the dog might get upset. You get them used to it, there's no issues. And other parental control, that's a very big one. Because, as you can imagine, the use of guardian dogs is just not very compatible with a lot of the lethal control methods. You can't bait on a guardian dog because the dog will take bait and die just as easily as any other. It's everything very much in a nutshell, especially the management of the dogs. Anybody who is interested in the topic. About, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, I wrote a manual for the use of livestock guardian dogs, which has a lot more information, especially on the practical aspects about raising a puppy and management of dogs. So anybody who's interested, it's a free PDF that can be downloaded from the web. And I will leave you guys with a lovely search picture.